talk about GMOs. So if you guys have ever Googled GMO, like you'll probably get images of like green tomatoes or poisonous apples. And I think that gives a lot of people the assumption that GMOs are just naturally bad. And that's what I thought at first too, until I did some more research on this topic. So the proposition that I'm trying to make today is that genetically modified foods will actually be beneficial to our society. And I will support this claim by stating 3 points. The first one being that genetically modified foods are safe for human consumption, that the genetic modification of crops helps to reduce the need to use pesticides, and that genetically modified foods have the potential to help people in need. So for those of you who don't know what GMOs are, they're any plant or animal that has been that has had its DNA genetically or altered in a laboratory and it's not found in nature. And most of the controversy of this issue comes through the genetic modification of food, just because a lot of people don't want to eat stuff that's unnatural, or they think it's immoral, which is totally reasonable. So this leads us to my first claim, which is that genetically modified foods are safe for our consumption. There was a report by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine in May of 2016, and they're a pretty credible source. This study was titled Genetically Engineered Crops, Experiences, and Prospects, and they pretty much stated that eating genetically modified crops is just as safe as eating their non-genetically modified counterparts. So that's to say, eating GM corn is just as safe as eating organic corn. But as I'll explain, it's actually a lot harder to find organic corn than it is to find genetically modified corn. According to David Johnson of Time Magazine, more than 90% of all soybean, cotton, and corn acreage in the US is used to grow genetically engineered crops. So if you really think about all of the food that we eat and the processed and packaged foods that have corn in it, corn syrup, it's a lot of food. So what I'm pretty much trying to get with this is that we've been exposed to genetically modified foods for a very long time, and we've been eating products of genetically modified crops, and we're fine so far. And this leads me to my second point, which is that the genetic modification of crops helps to reduce the need to use pesticides. So I think it goes without saying that pesticides are toxic and they're bad for the environment, but farmers need to use pesticides to get rid of the pests that harm their crops. But there are genetic modifications that can be done to crops that help to protect the crops from these pests. So there's this thing called Bt toxin. There's a group at UC San Diego that's studying this topic, and they say that with this method, plants themselves can produce the proteins and protect themselves from insects without any external Bt and or synthetic pesticide sprays. So basically what happens is that these crops are genetically modified to have Bt in it, so whenever an insect comes and tries to eat the plant or crop, it produces a specific protein that will actually kill the insect, and it therefore keeps the crop from being severely damaged. And additionally, there was a report by the American Council on Science and Health on a study that a PhD student in Germany did upon GMOs and pesticides. And in the study, they were able to find that genetically modified technology has actually reduced chemical pesticide use by 37%. So this kind of just helps to support the claim. And my final claim is that genetically modified foods have the potential to help people in need. So if you guys don't know what Monsanto is, they're basically the world's largest agricultural biotechnology corporation, and they're based out of St. Louis. And they say that crop yield can be increased by breeding and through the addition of genetically modified traits. In Hawaii, virus-resistant papaya has increased yields by an average of 40%. So if genetically modified crops can protect itself from virus and pests, and farmers are able to harvest more of them and get a bigger crop yield, we'll be able to potentially feed more people, and in a world where we have a very fast-growing population, this could be of use in the future. And the second example I have with this is golden rice. So according to Dan Charles, who is NPR's food and agriculture correspondent, he says that golden rice has been genetically modified to have beta-carotene, which is the source of vitamin A. And according to the World Health Organization, vitamin A is the main cause of blindness in children, and it primarily affects low-income countries. So if you can see that GMOs, the whole point of GMOs is to be used to our benefit. People create GMOs to help us. No one's like making it to harm us. So I think prioritizing the use of GMOs to help people in need and to potentially save lives instead of prioritizing people who are just kind of unsure if it's safe to eat, I think it's so important to do it for the greater good.
All right. Well, you could apply half of what you said as a refutation speech to the previous speech. It's interesting that we get those back to back, and they've got kind of contrasting positions. I think it's pretty obvious that there is controversy on the subject, since we had two arguments back to back taking kind of contrary positions on that. So that's easy. The propositions clearly identified. The structural stuff is all fine. So if we can keep that up for the rest of the term for everybody, we're going to be in good shape. I think everybody has a pretty good grasp of how they're supposed to be structuring during the presentations. The transitions are fine also. The evidence that you're presenting, I think, is pretty good to start with. I did think that you made an effort to try and qualify the sources that you had at the beginning. Sometimes we have to rely on a journalistic source, which was not necessarily bad, but then we get like a secondhand reference. You know, there's something going on in San Diego. There's a German PhD candidate, and that's a little ambiguous in the citation. So that creates less confidence than I had at the beginning when you were a little bit more deliberate about that. Actually, I think there's a part of your argument that helps clarify something that was said by the earlier speaker about what the potential risk is. You know, the BT that you are talking about, that's part of the product, and that's the sort of thing that, you know, kills the insects. My guess is that that's the thing that the previous speaker was talking about that gets into us and represents a potential threat. And, you know, if it's killing insects, it might not be very good for us. I'm not exactly sure how that works, and that's one of those places where more explanation will probably be required by the refutation speakers in both of these presentations. So, you know, that'll be an issue too that comes up later on. But I thought otherwise you did a pretty good job citing the sources, and you had good information there. You do a nice job speaking to us. I think that adds a great deal of credibility to the presentation as well. All right, thank you.